I'd also like to encourage those of us watching the live stream to send us questions via Twitter at Bard Grad Center TV. Yes, Jeffrey.
Hi, thank you all three of you. I'm just struck that we began in some ways with some objects that I think some of which were wine cups or wine vessels, related to consumption of intoxicating beverages. Not all of the examples you showed, and we ended with the same thing. And it just made me think of a thread that was running through, I think, particularly Andrew's paper, but I wonder if Ioannis would speak to it as well, which is about the specific setting or moment of experience in which a text was meant to be received. And I was just struck, Andrew, how many of the examples that you gave seemed to me like material strategies of yoking a textual message with a moment of intense sensory experience. I mean, it's implicit in what you were saying, but I was thinking of it in particular in relationship, for instance, to the first image you showed of the family at table with the NPC for Christ. And I was just realizing that the text is kind of floated directly above the plate of food that's being brought in. And if we imagine that the inscription behind the stove, would actually have been behind the stove, that would also in that room have been perhaps the site of the most intense, heat is a very intense and real and necessary physical experience. So I was just wondering, I was thinking of the old tradition of silence in monastic refectories, and at the moment of eating and ingesting food is when the word is sort of overlaid. And I wonder, is there some sort of consistent desire that goes from, your material to exploit these moments where the body is experiencing strong sensory input and also use that as the moment to get in conceptual input through the texts that are layered on top of them and are in a sense joined with those sensory experiences? And maybe the question of how these texts might function in a symposium context is part of that. Itais is a little harder because, as you point out, the text couldn't be read even if a bell signaling fire is a very intense moment for the community. Anyway, just a meditation on text, sensory intensity, and moment of receptivity.
I mean, the general context is of course the same, sitting together and eating and drinking, but the atmosphere, if you take into consideration what exactly is depicted and what the texts are saying, I mean, finding texts about death and the afterlife in a symposium, in a Greek symposium context, it would be rather unexpected in terms of the imagery. Yeah? Although we have literary evidence, where we have a symposium where they go into these kinds of philosophical discussions. But to go back to your question about how they were used and read, both in terms of the visual aspects and the textual aspects, absolutely. We know that these kinds of puzzles would take place. So trying to read even the nonsensical inscriptions, trying to understand what is going on, turning them around. There is a very interesting book on reading Greek vases by Anne Steiner, and there is a number of these vases where there is a very strange repetition of the subject on both sides, but with slight variation, so that the moment, let's say, the slaves in the symposium or the helpers would lift something and move it around, you would have the feeling that you are looking at moving, living images. So I would totally agree with what you suggested.
Shall I just quickly add to that? But that's a very great remark, Jeffrey. I think it's absolutely to the point that I think certainly in the Bodmer portrait, the idea of heat, the somatic element, is related to that, to the inscription very much. In fact, there's some evidence to suggest that in the 16th century, that hottest part of the room by the stove was called, the hell. I mean, so there is an association with hellfire.
I mean, frankly, I'd forgotten what it said, and I was expecting a very positive, happy inscription, "Come warm yourself at the warmth of Christ," or something like that, and of course,
Yeah, and it's much
it's
more
the opposite.
It's quite opposite. So the examples I've used, I have to say, are rather bleak, and I think there probably is a more positive one.
Well, I think the last one you ended with, or the penultimate one of the trenchers, is a positive one, because again, one is struck that, I mean, you use the word flower, that these are flowers, right, that are gathered, or a garden of verses.
Sure.
I mean, so the metaphor that's used for these sententiae is that of gathering fruits and flowers from a garden. And of course, that is what is on the dessert trenchers, right? Those are products of gardens that have been cultivated and gathered for our delectation. So again, there seems to me like just a one-on-one attempt to correspond.
And it extends to the decoration of borders, which are actually they're acorns, but they're fruits as well. So there is a kind of analogy there that I think is probably could be seen as a bit
And material to the point of today's.
quite so. Quite so.
Sorry, can I just speak to this? Because I think
Yeah.
it's absolutely of the essence that these are what Lessing would call epigrams, because they have that bipartite structure. They first of all stop you, they arrest you. They arrest you in some kind of sensory thing. What's that over there? So an object can have it whether or not it's inscribed, but you need to draw attention to it. So first you've got the material impact, whether it's the beauty or the warmth of it or the moving, the fact it's moving, and then you go over and you see, and it's actually going to say something. So it's the sort of double whammy that will in your terms. I mean, I think there's this question of, are you in the instructions to children, how you get them to know things. You've on the one hand, you've got to impress it. You've got to somehow get it into some kind of archived position, and yet you've got to keep it fresh. And it's that tension between, that which is present and present to consciousness and remembered, which all these objects are trying to juggle, I think. And so any kind of sensory impact is going to.
Maybe it increases the possibility of it being impressed in a good and helpful, lasting way.
Well, who knows? I mean, these would be metaphors that we need to scrutinise.
No, I think that's true. And of course, it is the notion of impressed wisdom, the contemporary notion of knowledge existing outside is impressed upon the malleable form of the heart. Because it's behind Erasmus is saying, those barriers that one can find. Is there a question?
No, I just thought you answered. Professor Weiner made me think of other instances of the juncture between an object, a metal object in particular, made by an artisan, and the naming or self-naming of the object. And I'm wondering whether we might find this in connection with other senses. For instance, incense burners. Are they? Do they bear inscriptions in which the voice is equated somehow with the fragrance, the smell?
Yeah.
Or now then I thought of metal swords that are given names. That I don't know what sense, but the alliance between the physical, the voice of the inscription, and the making of the object struck me very, very exciting idea.
I love the idea of the smell and the incense. Swords we have. Swords we have a lot, also especially from migration period with inscriptions. And then you get, the interesting thing actually happens in the Middle Age when they start writing not in Latin, when they start inscribing in English or French or Italian. Then, for some reason, they play much more. Then, the rise of literacy enables, in a sense, a much more playful inscription. As the last inscription I showed from Dijon, it's much more as if there is actually an audience that can actually read the inscription and is interested in the bell itself. So I'm absolutely taking this idea, and I think that's maybe where it relates to the other talks. These objects and mobility is very important here. The relation between an object and the spectator or the listener or the one who smells, which also raise the issue of touching the inscription, right? Because especially in both of your domestic objects, you lift the object, but you also touch the inscription. You're touching the name, and you're touching the verb or the proverb, and there is something there about the process where all of this is happening that I think intensifies even more the inscription.
Can I just answer that? The idea of the wine inscribed wine cup being lifted to the you are actually imbibing the words. And I know, Juliet, you've mentioned, you talked about this idea of an almost physical imbibing or receiving of words with the meat that Erasmus speaks of. It's quite a potent idea.
A question in the back? Hi, I have another question for Isa about bells. And wondering, I love that idea of the text that's on the bells being activated, and that is what is being sung when the bell is moved. I think that's really interesting. It doesn't have to speak the textual words, right? That that is what is embedded in the sound itself. And so I wonder if there are. You said that there are bells that are named, and there's one whose name is Marguerite. But what kinds of names do bells have? I know that in early Ireland, bells have names of their properties, like the little fire thrower, because it's a bell that rings out fire to kill dragons, or the little speckled one because it's all rusty, or the sound quality is sometimes the name of the bell. What are the names of the Hildesheim bells? Do you know the names of the Hildesheim bells that you showed?
I show the candlestick from it, but bells are usually named by honorable men, usually honorable men and women. For instance, last year the 7 bells in Notre Dame were named after dead bishops and other dead dignitaries, and actually one of them had a kind of maternal grandfather who was the Pope. In some weird relations of naming, there's one bell that was named after the Pope, and the bell that was produced for Notre Dame was kind of an offspring of that bell that was melted and recast. So there's all these relations and hierarchies and the dynasties of bells. But the act of naming is it's a very, just to show you, it exists until this very day. Each bell receives a name. It's a strange thing. It's part medieval folklore in its finest, in a sense.
Question for Professor Boulounopoulos. Thank you for taking us through this very interesting material. I was wondering if we can be sure that the text maker was always the same person as the image maker in the examples of the vases you showed or some of the other examples. The other question I have is this very interesting decline in the use of texts on vases as we move into the High Classical period, whether that has to do with in any way the development of literacy throughout these periods. Do you see any kind of correspondence or whether we know of anything?
With respect to your first question, we can never be sure whether the Euphronios is writing on his vases or Euthymides is writing on his vases, but there are strong indications that they are also those who are writing, especially the early ones are making a point out of it, that they can write, and that's why partly they are so obsessed with putting all these inscriptions on top of their vases. So we know of large workshops comparable to Rembrandt, where everyone is responsible for something. But the idea of having someone just to write on the vases, I don't know, it doesn't sound right. Your second question about the decline. This is the big problem that I was confronted with while I was preparing, as I said, this work in progress. And one of the ideas was exactly that we have an increase in literacy. But on the other side, and this is again very strange, although you don't have so many vase inscriptions anymore, you don't have, for various reasons, and they're not related to the vase inscriptions, in architecture, also the inscriptions go down. On the other side, you have an enormous increase in state documents. So all of a sudden, the Athenians are documenting absolutely everything. So, for example, the Athenian Acropolis and the Agora must have been filled in this period of time with state documents. So there is this kind of, let's say, discrepancy between, let's say, what is going on in the world of vases and architecture and what is going on with, let's say,
Makes a lot of sense now when you write so much and then you go to lunch. Last thing you want to see is a written word, right? It's like, no, I mean there's a different status with the written word all of a sudden once bureaucracy is manifesting itself. No?
I mean, if we go along that way and say, okay, that they are tired of reading,
yeah. Or reading becomes a different type of practice, right? It is not that practice of pleasure, it is not practice of education, but it is practice of work. Reading becomes part of work rather than pleasure, thus eliminating the written word from the world of pleasure and making it part of work, of labor.
It doesn't work either, because this is the period of time when the Homeric poems are written down.
Yeah.
That's right.
Is it significantly decline in the number of inscriptions, or the ratio of the number of inscriptions to the number of surviving vases, or the number of inscriptions to vases to population? It's not just the absolute number could have many explanations.
The numbers, when we're comparing just absolute numbers of archaic vases and absolute numbers of so-called classical vases, they are very much comparable. I would say we have perhaps even more classical vases than we have archaic vases. So that wouldn't work, but you're absolutely right. This is something that one should take into consideration. And what kind of inscriptions do we have all of a sudden? So there is also a change in quality. What kind of inscriptions do we have? So we have still a lot of so-called kalos inscriptions, until, let's say, the end of the 5th century, definitely. With these very brief statements about a handsome boy. But we have a lot of labels all of a sudden. We had them before, but we also had, let's say, this more sophisticated approach towards text, imagery, the relationship. And this is almost entirely lost. They are just putting the inscription to say, this is a bottle. But they don't really care to put the inscription so as to caress, in a way, the body of the bottle. Make a point out of the existence of the inscription next to the body of the bottle. This issue of corporeality and motility is lost. It's a label.
So we are running late, and I want to make sure that we leave enough time for everybody to get lunch today. We have a question that's come in on Twitter, and I see that there are a number of hands that have been up as well. So I'm going to ask the question that's on Twitter, and then we'll take 2 more questions, and then we'll break for lunch. So the question on Twitter is from Claire Canavan, and it's for Professor Morrill, and she asks, she wonders if you might say more about the different effects produced by the placement of inscriptions on different planes and different orientations and different surfaces of the object, like the edge or the rim or the center. She's inspired by the image of the mirror that you started with.
Gosh. Thank you. That's a very interesting question, actually. And how to answer it in any complicated way. With the material I've been dealing with, legibility has been important. So the inscriptions tend to be fairly accessible from whether you're holding it or whether you're using it or whether it's even on a shelf. Certainly for there's clearly a tradition in Protestant households in the 16th century of having a tablet above the table. And that relates actually to Geoffrey, what you were saying about suggesting a commensurality between the family table and the Last Supper. There's the rule of the family, there's the echo of the Mosaic tablets above the table, and it's meant to evoke, I think, the idea of sacramentality incrementality, if you like, of the meal, of the shared meal. It's significant, I think, that when families have themselves portrayed at a table, very often they're saying grace. And so it's the moment of grace, that moment of giving thanks and of actually articulating, if you like, your relationship with God is actually being recorded. And I think many of the inscriptions would have given force to that actual moment. We're talking about moments of particular force. So in that sense, to answer rather lamely, legibility, I think, is all important. I think it's different from the more meditational objects, that are more intimate and to be held. But even there, they are there, they can be seen, so to speak.
Okay, so 2 more questions. The friend here.
Hi. One is a humorous footnote, naming of the bells. You're talking about modern example of Notre Dame, but Dorothy Sayers and her novel, The Nine Tailors, you may be familiar with, those bells were named, there was a murder involved, and I won't give away the book, but the process of change ringing and based on weaving patterns is the basis, which is an interesting connection with all of that. And I wanted at Bard to raise the idea of fabric as material culture. I hope somebody will be talking about text and textile a little bit later. Wonderful. Because especially talking about sensory, wearing, sensory intensity, wearing fabric that's got a raised pattern, and there's so many examples.
Thank you.
One final question before we break for lunch.
Well,
No, please.
no, I'm just bursting to say something, but please, you ask your question, I'll say it.
Oh, well, I just wanted to play, for a brief moment, play devil's advocate and ask how fresh these texts really were for viewers. If we're in a world where the symposium, a lot of the vases have name inscriptions or more complicated texts, where fruit trenchers and cups and all of the sort of dining implements have these texts, well, at what point does the viewer become jaded? Are there jaded viewers? There's this really interesting quote from the late Roman period where Ausonius, this sort of Gallo-Roman aristocrat, talks about how pretentious aristocrats or nobles will inscribe the names of Romulus and Remus on their clothes, on their doors, on their walls, everywhere, as kind of sort of an empty symbol of status, I suppose. So at what point does the fresh viewer or the sort of fresh eyes become jaded on it?
That speaks to a point that Judith raised earlier, and it's a really interesting one. When do these decorations and images and inscriptions just become generic? And perhaps they change meaning, perhaps they're not carefully scrutinized, but become general signifiers of piety that can still evoke a sort of general atmosphere without a specific sense of interaction and prayer. It's a very difficult question to answer, but a very good one to raise.
I think it's a more difficult to answer that for Greek antiquity, because we know that the repetition of a specific text adds to its power. So Joseph Day showed that in several articles in his book, that some texts really scream for you to read them, and they become powerful the moment they are repeated and repeated and repeated over and over and over again. So I could imagine that happening also within the context of the symposium. I think that we have less in the classical period because probably the discussions are different. The puzzles that are asking are different. It's about deciphering the visual evidence without the support of, let's say, the text. So it's a different kind of dealing with the object in terms of playing with your co-symposiast in the context of the symposium. But freshness, it's not really something that I would always look for in Greek antiquity. Repetition is so important.
But could I just say, isn't that what we've seen all day? Isn't that what the symposium is about? That adding the material dimension and the sensory dimension of feeling that text on the bearded vessel as you're pouring it, and you have to turn it to get the whole thing, and you're looking at your face in the mirror, and my God, there's an inscription on the side. Those are all techniques, aren't they, of making it unexpected, fresh, newly positioned, juxtapositions that are striking, or unusual at a moment of vulnerability. Isn't that the way that an old chestnut would be?
Yeah, but for how long?
Yeah.
Well,
That's
you
the
constantly
question.
have to seek for new
Yeah.
ways, right?
I mean, after, if we follow your way of arguing, after seeing and using 10 times a bearded bottle, then
You get wrong.
yeah, exactly. I mean, a beard is a beard. That's
Maybe freshness is not the right term at this item. Maybe
Yeah.
treasured is a better term because that could
Yeah.
sustain, the repetition, which enhances the
Yes.
consequence of the thing, but also, brings it up again.
But then if something is treasured, is it used often? And then it becomes this something removed on the shelf, and then you lose the entire aspect of the functionality and the usability of, let's say, the bearded bottle. There's something about the treasured aspect of that object that eliminates its functionality and makes it into something that is enclosed in a showcase, right? So there's some problematics, I think, in trying to understand the place of the inscription, and again the idea of the jadedness of the use of the same inscription over and over again.
Treasured might not be the right word, either loved or valued or...
Loved, all right.
There's a text in Alcuin that specifically addresses this, where he says that pictures are easy to become tired of, but texts are never that way.
Yeah.
So you might think of the text as being a way of invigorating or enlightening the image, especially in music.
Thank you all for your attendance. Thank you to our speakers for their wonderful papers. Please endeavor to reconvene here as close to 1 o'clock as possible. I know we're